Coming up, I'll be speaking with Kater Havelin, author of Best Hikes of the Twin Cities. That's next on the St. Paul Forum. Welcome to the St. Paul Forum. I'm John Forde. With me today is author Kater Havelin, author of Best Hikes of the Twin Cities. Welcome, Kate.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
You weren't born here. I can tell by that name, Havelin.
I was not born here.
Okay. How did you get here?
I came here in 1979 to go to McAllister College. So I'm originally from the East Coast, suburban Philadelphia.
And why did you never leave?
You know, I didn't plan to stay forever.
I was digging for a compliment. It really was.
Well, it is winter in Minnesota. I really did not plan to stay here forever. But I have found many fun things to do here. And I married a Minnesotan, and they don't leave.
Yeah, okay.
The truth.
Okay, good. So we're here to talk about the best hikes of the Twin Cities and a number of other interesting facets of your amazing career. Tell us about Best Hikes of the Twin Cities. This is how old a book now?
It came out in 2008, and it's already in its second edition. And it's, you know, as you can see, a short little book, 31 hikes around the Twin Cities, a lot in St. Paul and the surrounding area. You know, and really the cool thing that I found being in the Twin Cities for so long is that there are so many great places to explore. They're not far from where so many of us live, and a lot of them are free. I mean, state parks, yeah, it costs $25 for an annual pass, but when you think of what it costs to go to the movies one time with your family, you get an annual state park pass and you're in for free for the rest of the year. You know, and there's so many places in St. Paul, you know, Battle Creek Regional Park, you know, all the Crosby Farm Regional Parks, you know, and just even the trails around the lakes, you know, Phelan, and that are great to visit, to walk, to explore. You see a lot. You see animals. You see people. You know, you can kind of get away from the city easily when you're still in the city.
Now, you said a lot of them are in St. Paul, but I'm expecting more precision than that. How many are in St. Paul?
Okay, well, do you consider Greater St. Paul? Can we include Maplewood, you know,
I'm wondering,
Tamarack?
in any of these hikes, did you cross like a municipal boundary?
Oh, many.
Yeah. So that makes the count hard.
Yeah, and you know, the thing is that you know, just even Fort Snelling, when I go for a walk from my house and I live by St. Thomas or a bike ride, you know, I have what I call like a 4-city loop. So I can go from St. Thomas, you walk along the river, really beautiful trails. You can go through Hidden Falls and Crosby Farm, cross the 35E bridge, then you're into Lilydale, then you go through Mendota Heights, you go back over the Highway 50 bridge, then you're at Fort Snelling in Minneapolis, and then you cross the Fort Parkway Bridge and you're back into St. Paul. So, you know, one walk that can just take a little afternoon. You can do 4 cities, and you can do it on foot. You can do it on bike, and you can do it pretty easily. And of course, you could do just Crosby Farm, just Hidden Falls, just Minnehaha Falls. There's a lot of places where if you just have an hour, you can go and do something fun. It doesn't have to be an all-day expedition.
You know, they say you should always save the best for last unless it's beer. But let's start with, what's the best hike?
You know, people ask me, the first book that I wrote, a trail book that I wrote, Minnesota Running Trails, had 49 trails around the state, and everybody said to me afterward, every interview would say, what's your favorite hike? You know, and what's your favorite park? And really, I could not pick just one. And even with the 31 trails around the Twin Cities, I couldn't pick just one. But I did do a Kate's Top 10. And some of my top 10 are Afton State Park, which is, you know, this, East Metro. I go to Crosby Farm Regional Park a lot. You know, I almost always see herons there. You know, you go to Fort Snelling at Pike Island, you always see deer. You know, and no matter what time of year you go there, I've never been totally alone there. I mean, so that, you know, people often say, you know, where do you go and you feel safe? You can go to Pike Island any time of the year, even on a really cold day in the middle of January, and there's a walking trail on the island. You know, you walk on sort of, it's more or less groomed, it's so stamped down. You can snowshoe, you can cross-country ski there, and you'll see other people, you'll see people walking their dogs, you'll see deer, probably, and you know, you're right in the city, and you can have an adventure, and you're just It's right there. It's easy.
Well, amazingly, you're right at the junction of the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers.
Right. I mean, so at Fort Snelling is the confluence. I mean, that's the reason the fort was built there. But that Pike Island, or what we call Pike Island now, that is named for Zebulon Pike, who first camped there in 1805 when he was traveling up the Mississippi from St. Louis. The native people, the Dakota, were living on that land then, and he made deals with them, and there was really bad deals for the Native Americans.
Yeah.
But they considered Pike Island, the confluence, sacred land because it was the center. They called it the center of the earth. It was where the rivers came together, and it's still, in a sense, considered sacred land. You're not allowed to ride a bicycle on Pike Island.
Oh,
I mean, it's a state park,
yeah.
and you can bike in other parts of it, but not on the island.
Interesting. Tell us about some of the other hikes in St. Paul.
You know, actually, Battle Creek Regional Park is a really fun place to go to. Cross-country skiers love it, and in the spring and summer and fall, mountain bikers mountain bikers like going there, but you can't go there right after a heavy rain. A lot of times that's hard for mountain biking. It's hard on the trails, harder than it is on the bicycles. It kind of degrades the trails. But Battle Creek has all kinds of nice trails, and there's some super hilly trails. I mean, I remember walking a section of the trail, and I put my hand out, and I felt like I could almost touch the hill in front of me. You know, so there's some hills there, and it makes for some nice views. You get to
And
the
the
top.
creek itself has such a steep pitch to it. It just rumbles down for so long.
Right.
We're very fortunate to have that place.
Yeah. And do you know how Battle Creek got its name?
I'm assuming something to do with war?
Well, it was a skirmish between tribes, yes. Ojibwe and Dakota tribes, in I think 1842.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about the north end of the city, you know, away from the river?
So let's see. You know, so a lot of my trails, I must say, this is part of my bias. I love the Mississippi River, and so a lot of my trails are right along it, but not all of them. And so if you get away from the river, you can go to Maplewood Nature Center. You can go to Tamarack and Nature Center. There's really nice places there. Afton. Cottage Grove Ravine Park is another nice place. So that's south, not north. Really, they're all around the city. You know, I mean, and they're not. They're not just. It's not just a Book of St. Paul hikes. I mean, you know, you can go to Minneapolis. You can go to Eloise Butler Wildflower Garden, which for those of us who live in St. Paul, that's not that far away, and it'll open again in spring on April 1st.
Is there anything like Eloise Butler Flower Garden in St. Paul? I mean, the conservatory to some extent, but
I don't think there's an outdoor wildflower garden like Eloise Butler in the city of St. Paul, no.
Okay.
Although I have to say, the Japanese garden at Como, which is a seasonal garden, is really phenomenal. That's a really wonderful place to go to. And you know, anytime if you really need to see flowers, I mean, I was just at Como Conservatory again last week, twice in 1 week. It's really worth going to.
And what's the farthest out hike from the metro area?
The one in Rogers, Crowhassan Park Reserve, which is Rogers, so that's northwest of the Twin Cities. There's 600 acres of restored prairie there. It's really beautiful. And I went on a camping trip there with my son's elementary school class, and I got to tell you, the teacher did flashlight tag where the kids turn off their lights, and it's dark. You know, you're an hour from the metro area, and you can see so many more stars than you can see in the heart of the city. And you know, it's an hour drive. It's not that far away.
That's amazing. I'd like to return to hikes if we have time at the end of this, but let's talk about your career. You, after college, you spent a number of years as a news producer at WCCO Television, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you worked with legendary Dave Moore.
That was one of the best parts of being in TV for me.
Okay.
I just felt so lucky to get a chance to work with Dave.
Did he have any warts?
Don't we all? He was a real person. I mean, I think so many people who saw him on TV just thought, wow, he's just this genial, so cool guy. And he really was an amazingly cool person. And so many of us who worked with him we wanted to work with him. You know, I mean, he brought out the best in us, but he was a real person. Yes, he would be befuddled by technology, and I can totally, you know, understand that. This is when TV scripts were done on 8-part paper, you know, 8-part script paper, because every member of the crew would need a part of it. And we always joke that Dave would go through like a forest of paper every single week because he was a perfectionist. And when I worked with him, we were not doing a live show. We were doing more on Sunday that aired Sunday morning at 9:30. And we would tape it on Friday, and Dave would spend all week crafting his stories. And oftentimes they're just the little stories, you know, of the squirrel stealing some kid's candy and having it up in his squirrel nest up in the tree. And there'd be some cute video of it. You know, on most news shows, that would be written in 15 seconds by some harried producer, and it would just, you know, oh, cute, you know, squirrel in a tree with some candy, ha, you know. Dave would write that and rewrite it day after day. And the amount of script paper that one squirrel with candy, you know, it'd be this much script paper. But the story, when Dave told it on Friday and people saw it on Sunday, it was perfect. It was worth this much paper.
Come alive.
Yeah,
yes. Okay.
yeah.
Now, you also did local news, is that correct?
Yeah, I worked, when I started at CCO, I worked daily news. I spent a year on the business beat when Northwest Airlines was up in play, when, remember Al Checky?
Sure.
And I would, like...
Governor Checky.
No. I spent a lot of time chasing around Egan looking for Al Checky. Oh, my gosh. A year on the business beat, a year on the medical beat. I worked in Dimension, but I have to say, working with Dave Moore, that was the highlight.
Did you work with Don Shelby?
You know, a little bit, yeah. And actually, I just saw Shelby not too long ago. I took a class at the U, a complete scholar class about Mark Twain's, the autobiography that was just released. And Shelby's a big, Twain lover, and he was one of the presenters. It was great to see him again. Yeah. He really is a man of many, many interests, you know.
When I think of local news, I think of the kind of, you know, if it bleeds, it leads kind of thing. And I remember Shelby saying some very pointed things about how there are times he just wanted to puke that they have to. Did you feel that as well?
Oh, totally. I mean, I've told all my friends this story about this. To me, does in a way epitome. It's the epitome of TV news. It doesn't. It's not always true, but this story is true. I got sent down to Northfield to. Jonas Salk was in town for this, you know, thing of they do a conference once a year, and so, you know, I came back with this nice little story about Jonas Salk, you know, and polio, and I got back, and the news director called me into his office, and he said, I think he knew how I was going to react, and he's like, Kate, you know, TV news.
He's bracing you.
We have this two-headed turtle, and there's only room for either Jonas Salk or the two-headed turtle. So my story of Jonas Salk did not make it, because really, what's more newsy? People have heard of Jonas Salk, but a two-headed turtle.
Oh, that's amazing.
So, yeah. CCO did a lot of good stories, but, you know, TV news, I'm sure there were people who saw that two-headed turtle and were like, wow, did you see that two-headed turtle?
Never thought
and,
about
you know, if you think of Facebook now, that two-headed turtle would be everywhere.
Yeah,
you know?
on YouTube, sure.
Yeah,
exactly,
and with Jonas Salk.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
you know. Yeah. Do we want serious or do we want, you know, wow?
If you're just joining us, this is the St. Paul Forum. I'm John Forde, and I'm speaking with Kater Havelin, author of The Best Hikes of the Twin Cities. Kate's also been a journalist with WCCO, and now I'd like to segue and talk a little bit about some of your other books. You've written a big number, but I'm fascinated by, like, 4 of them have great pull.
Yeah, I've written 16 books for young people, a lot of historic books, and some biographies. Biographies of Ulysses Grant, Che Guevara, Victoria Woodhull, who's the first woman who ran for president. She ran in the U.S. She ran in 1872 against Ulysses Grant. Queen Elizabeth I. And then I've got 2 new books coming out this year, Historic Fashions of the Civil War and Historic Fashions of the Colonial and Indigenous Era. So I've learned a lot of history.
I can actually hold up one of the books. Let's hold up Queen Elizabeth and Che Guevara next to each other.
The twins.
This is some of Kate's fabulous handiwork. Let's talk first about Queen Elizabeth. Right. What made her so interesting?
You know, I just think, one, she was alive at such an amazingly rich time in history. There had been a lot of technological developments, the kinds of ships and things like that, and architecture, and people were doing phenomenal things. It was an age of discovery and exploration. And under her reign, England rose to incredible power. So here's this woman, this so powerful woman, who's leading the most powerful country. They defeat her navy defeats the Spanish Armada, who had been the reigning superpower, and suddenly England is the power in the world, and it's led by this woman. And here's England growing enormously and exploring all around the world and doing these phenomenal things. And here this country that is on this exploration spurt is led by this woman who never left her tiny island. You know, we talk about the Elizabethan age. She never built a castle for herself. I mean, in some ways there's so many contradictions with her story. You know, she's called the Virgin Queen. Who knows if she, you know, I mean.
Let's conjecture here on the forum about that kind of thing.
You know, she led a rich life, and she was a powerful woman in a time then and now when powerful women are the exception.
Interesting. Okay, Ulysses S. Grant.
Oh, Ulysses Grant will always be in my head. You know, he was not a great president, but he was a good man, and he was such a good man in some ways. He was really not cut out to be president at all, but he was cut out to be a good leader of people in a sense, because he was a good person, and he was so steadfast and determined. That was his strength, and sometimes it was his weakness. In his memoirs, which are really well written, a lot of people say that they are the best memoirs ever written by a president. He talks about just how sort of pig-headed he could be. If he was on his horse and he set out to go in a direction and he realized he was not going the right way, he wouldn't turn around. He would continue going in a sense. He wouldn't just, okay, I should just go back and, you know, correct my mistake right now. He could make a big loop rather than just turn around right then. And so that determination that, look, I'm going to stay the course, that helped the Union win the war. He was the general that won the war. And it's really interesting, you know, in America, we really see Lincoln as the great emancipator. Around the world, Grant was the one who was seen as the great emancipator. When he traveled around the world after his terms of presidency, he was seen as the victor. He was the one who was seen who saved the United States. And Lincoln certainly recognized Grant's role. I mean, if Grant had not won the battles that he had won, Lincoln would not have been reelected. Yes. You know, and the course of history would have changed. Yeah.
But he did bring division to your family, because you told me in a previous conversation that your son had been arguing that Lee was better.
Oh, my younger son, yes, the contrarian. We've had many battles at the dinner table, Grant versus Lee.
That's quite an interesting family.
Yes.
Okay. In the same time frame, the next one,
Victoria Woodhull.
Victoria Woodhull.
Yeah. When I was researching the book about Ulysses Grant, I learned about Victoria Woodhull, who was somebody I'd never heard of. Had you ever heard of her?
That's why I'm looking for the name.
Yes.
Woodhull. Yeah.
Victoria Woodhull.
Yeah.
This woman's story really deserves a phenomenal movie. You know, I mean, it would, if you tell her story really with a lot of detail, it's an R-rated movie. She started out as, you know, super poor. Her dad was really a charlatan. They traveled around and did all these things. You know, I mean, it was an era when people were listening to voices, and there was a lot of belief in spirits, and so she was a spiritual healer. She and her sister would lay hands on people. I mean, this is how they helped to support their family, her parents and their many siblings. And she and her sister Tenny were one of the first women to run a newspaper. And while she and Tenny were running this newspaper, Victoria decided to run for president. I mean, she really believed that women needed power. She fought a lot on a lot of different fronts. She believed in the labor union. She believed in contraception, and so she's running for president against Ulysses Grant. Nobody takes her seriously at all. She asked Frederick Douglass to be her running mate. He doesn't want to be, you know, he wants no part of her. You know, she's an outsider. She's even an outsider even within the suffragette movement. I mean, because she doesn't play by the rules. She just does her own thing. So she and Tenny, while she's running for election, run a story about the leading religious man in the country, Henry Ward Beecher.
Yeah.
We've all heard of him. Okay. What Victoria Woodhull said was that Reverend Beecher had multiple affairs with with women in his congregation, including Victoria. And she was arrested on obscenity charges for putting this in her newspaper. People knew it was true. She was not found guilty of lying. It was obscenity charges to say this about one of the leading men. And so she was in jail on Election Day. Obviously, she did not win. She and her sister were befriended by Commodore Vanderbilt, who gave them money to start the first stock brokerage firm led by women.
Wow.
Yeah. They just did so many things. They tried to eat at Delmonico's, the famous New York steak place, and they were told, "Excuse me, ladies, you must have a man with you here." So they go out to the cab stand, get the groom who's at their carriage, bring him in and say, "He'll have tomato soup with us." And they made money, they lost money on Wall Street. Eventually, they ended up leaving the country. They each went to England, and they each married multiple millionaires over there. Victoria married one of the richest men in England, and so.
That is a fascinating story.
And then went on to become one of the first women over there to drive cars, and she led an amazing life.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, one last book, Che Guevara.
I think he's one of those people that I think I'm less fascinated by him than some other people. I think his story is amazing just for the strength of his character. Here's this Argentinian guy who as a boy was so sickly with asthma that he missed tons of school. He was in bed for so much of his childhood. When he was rejected by the Argentinian army because of his asthma, he wasn't even fit to be a foot soldier, and so then he goes to Cuba. He's excited by the idea of the revolution. And he becomes this amazing leader. Again, like Grant, here's somebody who has a very strong sense of self and a strong sense of determination. And so Che Guevara is leading men even when they have to carry him. And they did have to carry him. He was often so sick with asthma that they're in this rainforest, this moist air, and, he's smoking these cigars, which of course is exactly what someone with asthma should be doing. And he would get really sick, and he couldn't ride, he could not even walk, and his men would literally carry him.
And why was the United States so mad at him?
I think there was just so much. Part of it is resources, in the same way that right now that we look at what's happening in the Middle East. We look at countries who have resources that we want and that we feel we should have, and so we want to control what happens there so that our resources are not disturbed. Well, Cuba is a land of a lot of resources, and so America wanted those resources, and they wanted to control what was happening right off our shores. So. And
I'm trying to recall more of Guevara's personal story. He was a pretty well-educated man, wasn't he?
Yes, he was trained as a doctor, and when he first went to Cuba for the revolution, he was going to be, in a sense, a medic. And the first fight that broke out, he realized he could either basically grab the medical supplies, or he could grab a gun and fight. And he just, right then, he made the choice. I'm going with a gun.
Wow.
He was not really a doctor. That was not his role.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell us about some of the other books you've written. 16, we've talked about 4 briefly here.
I wrote a series of books on relationships. They were the first books I wrote, and they're for high school students who are at a very basic reading level. And you realize, like, even if you can't read, it doesn't mean that you don't need information, especially information about, my parents are driving me crazy, or domestic abuse, or child abuse, or incest, or sex harassment, peer pressure, dating, and assertiveness. So those were the topics. So they're kind of grown-up topics, but they're the things that kids do need to know about. So wrote those, and then the 2 new ones that are coming out that are historic fashions of the Civil War. That one, there's just so much cool stuff that happened in the Civil War.
Let's get to the historic fashions in a minute, but are they self-help books you were describing?
In a sense, they're books that kind of give kids advice. They are advice books for young people, yeah.
Okay.
And they're school library books. I know when I was researching these books, I had to do what my editor, what the publisher called competitive research. You want to find out what other books are out there. So I called up Como High School, and I asked if I could, just come take a look at like what books they had in their library. And the librarian was very nice. This was a number of years ago, and she pointed out to me, she said, I know kids read, when they want these kind of books. She says, we have a book on interracial dating. It never gets checked out of the library, but I find it in different places all the time. Kids
really
want,
yeah,
I mean, kids, they want to know about, what's happening with things in their lives and their families and, their emotions and what they need to do and what is happening and what isn't happening. And so I think that kind of basic information is really key.
So that lack of a paper trail on the fact that they read that book on interracial, did that affect the way you wrote any of these books?
I really tried to put as much information that I think that young people would want. I mean, the dating book, I put in what I thought was really useful, specific, concrete advice about sex, almost all of which was cut out. Oh. Because the editor said, if you make it explicit, schools won't buy it.
Yeah.
School districts won't buy it, and so it's not there. I mean, I think they did keep the Planned Parenthood youth website that I had in there, which has really phenomenally great information. So if kids were looking, they could see that, but they're not going to find the level of detail that I wanted in that book.
Okay, we got about 2.5 minutes left. Let's touch briefly on historical fashions and then finish with our friend.
Okay, historic fashions of the Civil War. I mean, people who love the Civil War, there's so much depth to it, but to look at it through the lens of fashion, I hadn't really done until this book. There's so much cool stuff. Really, it's the birth of department stores. It's the beginning of when Americans begin to shop for pleasure and not just for necessity. Until the Civil War, so much clothing had been made at home, and there was so much changes in technology, all the stuff about the cotton gin and everything. So now, clothes can be mass-produced, and because they can be mass-produced, the Union Army was the first army that had mass-produced clothing. They could make a lot of clothes for all those Union troops, and they realized they had to come up with like standard sizing, stuff like that they'd never done before, and it again just sort of accentuated the difference between the North and the South. The South did not have factories; they were not making any uniforms for their clothes. The South ran out of dye to make their fabrics the butternut, which was their original color. So they ended up having to use hickory, and they ran out of. They were desperate just to even. They were taking clothes off of dead Union soldiers down in the South, and the North finally said, okay, if we find any Southern soldier wearing a Northern troop, we will kill him immediately. You got to stop this; it's too confusing.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
We've just a little over a minute left, but I want to talk briefly about your friend Darcy Polland.
Yeah. When I worked at CCO, I was really lucky to meet so many neat people, and one of them was Darcy Polland. I think a lot of people remember her. She was the reporter who used a wheelchair to get around. And I think that point, one of the things that I loved about Darcy was that she was so strong opinion. She hated when people would say someone who was confined to a wheelchair. So if you can remember anything to remember Darcy, never say that. I mean, she wasn't confined to a wheelchair. She slept in a bed. She sat in other chairs. She went out tubing, after her accident in the water. I mean, she could get around. The wheelchair was a way for her to get around because her legs didn't work the way other people's did anymore. But she was such an amazing person, and she had so much joy. And she wanted people to see the joy and not to see a chair. Yeah. See a person, because she was a person who had a lot of joy.
And she passed away.
It's been a year now. It's really, yeah. I was just thinking about her when I was driving over here. It's so hard for me to imagine. I'm on Facebook and I see that we have like X number of mutual friends, but
she's not there. Yeah, she's still
there.
On Facebook.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, she'll be with us always.
Yes, she will. Yeah. Well, Kate, thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure speaking with you.
Thanks, John.
Yeah. Okay. I've been speaking with Kater Havelin, author of many, many books, including The Best Hikes of the Twin Cities. That's all for this week. Join us again next week on the St. Paul Forum.